May 28, 1945. Mondorf-les-Bains, Luxembourg. The pencil stopped moving as General Oberst Alfred Jodl stared at the American intelligence officer across the interrogation table, his face draining of colour as he processed words that shattered everything he had believed about German military intelligence. "You're telling me that Patton's entire army group, the first United States Army group, never existed?" The American officer's slight nod would trigger the most profound psychological collapse in modern military history. For 2 years, the Wehrmacht's highest commanders had positioned hundreds of thousands of troops to defend against fabricated threats, moved divisions to counter imaginary enemies, and maintained defensive positions against forces that existed only as rubber and canvas. The mathematical truth emerging in that interrogation room was devastating. Fewer than 3,000 Allied specialists had successfully neutralized nearly 500,000 German soldiers without firing a single shot. What Jodl didn't know, what no German commander would fully comprehend until decades later, was that they had been defeated not by superior numbers or firepower, but by the most elaborate military deception in human history. An operation so audacious that it involved inflatable tanks weighing just 93 pounds masquerading as 32-ton Shermans, Hollywood artists creating entire fictional divisions, and double agents so trusted by German intelligence that Hitler personally decorated them with the Iron Cross for warning about invasions that would never come. The story that would unfold through post-war interrogations, declassified documents, and veteran testimonies would reveal a truth more devastating than any military defeat. The German High Command had spent the crucial months of 1944 defending against illusions. The foundations of the greatest military illusion in history were laid on December 6, 1943, when the Allied Combined Chiefs of Staff approved Operation Bodyguard, the comprehensive deception plan designed to mislead German forces about the time and place of the invasion of Northwest Europe. The scope was unprecedented, creating multiple fictional military formations across Britain, establishing fake invasion preparations from Norway to the Mediterranean, and coordinating the largest double-agent operation ever attempted. At the heart of this deception stood the London Controlling Section, established in 1942 under Colonel John Bevan, operating from offices beneath Whitehall. This small team of intelligence officers would orchestrate a symphony of lies so complex that even decades later, historians struggle to untangle truth from fiction. Their weapon was not tanks or aircraft, but information itself, carefully crafted, meticulously distributed, and devastating in its impact. The mathematics of the challenge were stark. In January 1944, German forces in Western Europe comprised 58 divisions, approximately 850,000 combat troops. The Allies needed to ensure these forces were dispersed across the 3,000-mile Atlantic Wall rather than concentrated at the actual invasion site. Every German division kept away from Normandy on D-Day could save thousands of Allied lives. But the true genius of Operation Bodyguard lay not in its grand strategic vision, but in its psychological sophistication. British intelligence had spent 3 years studying German military doctrine, command structures, and most importantly, the personal psychology of Adolf Hitler himself. They knew Hitler's obsession with the Pas-de-Calais region, his conviction that any rational enemy would choose the shortest crossing point. They understood his tendency to see patterns that confirmed his preconceptions, his trust in intelligence that supported his strategic assumptions. This psychological profile would shape every aspect of the deception. As Thaddeus Holt would later write in The Deceivers, the operation represented the first time in military history that an entire campaign was built not around defeating the enemy's forces, but around defeating the enemy's mind. On January 20th, 1944, at Camp Forest, Tennessee, something unprecedented in military history began taking shape. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, soon to be known as the Ghost Army, assembled for training unlike anything previously attempted by any military force. These weren't ordinary soldiers. but a carefully selected group of artists, engineers, and creative professionals recruited from America's top art schools and advertising agencies. The 603rd Camouflage Engineers formed the visual deception component, with personnel drawn from institutions including Pratt Institute, Cooper Union, and the Philadelphia Museum School of Industrial Art. Among them was 22-year-old Bill Blass, who would later revolutionize fashion design, and Ellsworth Kelly, future pioneer of minimalist art. These men brought skills the military had never before considered essential to warfare: the ability to create convincing illusions on a massive scale. At the U.S. Rubber Company's Alice Mill facility in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, a revolutionary manufacturing process was underway. Workers, many of them teenage girls earning 49 cents per hour, assembled pneumatic tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces from rubberized canvas and neoprene. Each inflatable Sherman tank weighed just 93 pounds deflated, but when inflated with gasoline-powered compressors could be operational in 20 minutes. From a distance of 400 yards, the typical range for German aerial reconnaissance, these rubber constructs were indistinguishable from actual armoured vehicles. The technical specifications were remarkable. The inflatable equipment featured authentic markings, unit insignia, and even simulated wear patterns. The Ghost Army developed techniques for creating realistic track marks using bulldozers equipped with special attachments. They learned to position vehicles at slightly irregular angles, mimicking the natural disorder of actual military encampments. Most ingeniously, they deliberately included imperfect camouflage, allowing enemy reconnaissance to discover hidden positions that seemed carelessly concealed. Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Simonson, commanding the 603rd Engineers, instituted training that pushed his men to theatrical extremes. Soldiers learned to create entire military installations overnight, complete with motor pools, supply depots, and command posts. They studied the daily rhythms of real military units, when laundry would be hung, when vehicles would move for maintenance, when smoke would rise from field kitchens. While the visual deception captured enemy eyes, the 3,132nd Signal Service Company attacked enemy ears with unprecedented sonic warfare. Working with Bell Telephone Laboratories in Murray Hill, New Jersey, they developed technology that would have seemed like science fiction just years earlier. The unit's primary weapons were 500-pound speakers mounted on modified M10 tank destroyers, capable of projecting sound up to 15 miles. These weren't simple loudspeakers, but sophisticated acoustic projection systems that could simulate entire armoured divisions on the move. Bell Labs engineers created detailed atmospheric effect tables, calculating how temperature, humidity, wind speed, and terrain affected sound propagation. A recording of tanks moving through mud at 40 degrees Fahrenheit required different amplification settings than the same recording played at 70 degrees. The sound effects library they assembled was extraordinary in its detail. Engineers at Fort Knox drove tanks at various speeds over different surfaces, concrete, gravel, mud, grass, recording each with multiple microphone placements. They captured the distinctive sounds of different tank models, the high-pitched whine of Stuart light tanks, the deeper rumble of Shermans, the characteristic squeal of tank tracks needing maintenance. Bridge construction was recorded in segments: pile drivers, welding torches, officers shouting commands, the splash of pontoons hitting water. Staff Sergeant John Shilstone, a sound engineer before the war, developed mixing techniques that created three-dimensional soundscapes. By using multiple speakers positioned at different distances, they could simulate the approach of an armoured column, complete with the Doppler effect as vehicles passed hypothetical listening posts. German acoustic reconnaissance units, trained to identify Allied equipment by sound signatures, reported hearing massive armoured formations that existed only as carefully orchestrated recordings. The psychological sophistication extended to small details. They recorded soldiers complaining about food, sergeants threatening punishment for minor infractions, vehicles that wouldn't start on cold mornings. These ambient sounds, mixed with primary effects, created an audio portrait so convincing that local French civilians would later swear they had seen the tanks they had only heard. Perhaps no element of the deception required more technical precision than the radio simulation conducted by the Signal Company Special. Radio operators in military units developed distinctive transmission patterns, their fist, as unique as fingerprints. German signal intelligence, among the world's most sophisticated, catalogued these patterns to track unit movements. The Ghost Army had to replicate not just message traffic, but the individual quirks of hundreds of radio operators. Using SCR 399 radio sets, the Ghost Army's 296 signal specialists maintained the electronic signature of entire divisions. They employed IBM machines programmed to generate random 5-letter code groups that mimicked genuine encrypted traffic. Private First Class Lester Friedman spent weeks studying recordings of specific radio men from real units, learning to duplicate their unique transmission rhythms and patterns. The radio deception operated on strict schedules that matched observed Allied patterns. Morning reports at 0600, supply requests at 1000, evening situation reports at 1800. They simulated radio discipline failures, operators who forgot to encode routine messages, brief transmissions in clear language during emergencies, the characteristic increase in traffic before major operations. German intercept stations, monitoring from powerful facilities in France and Belgium, faithfully logged every transmission, building detailed pictures of Allied formations that didn't exist. While the Ghost Army prepared its tools of deception, the broader Operation Fortitude was taking shape across Britain. The operation split into two major components: Fortitude North, suggesting an invasion of Norway, and Fortitude South, indicating an assault on the Pas de Calais. Each required its own elaborate infrastructure of deception. Colonel David Strangeways, a brilliant intelligence officer who had served with Montgomery in North Africa, received responsibility for tactical deception under 21st Army Group. On February 23, 1944, Strangeways completely rewrote the Fortitude South plan, recognizing that physical deception alone couldn't succeed. Instead, he created a framework that relied primarily on double agents and radio traffic, with visual deception serving as confirmation rather than primary evidence. The centerpiece was the 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, commanded by General George S. Patton, a choice calculated for maximum German attention. Patton, whom the Germans considered America's best combat commander, had been conspicuously absent from public view since the slapping incidents in Sicily. German intelligence desperately sought his location, convinced that wherever Patton appeared, the main Allied effort would follow. FUSAG's notional order of battle was magnificent in its detail. It comprised two armies: the 1st Canadian Army, real but assigned elsewhere, and the 3rd US Army, real but not yet operational. Under these were 11 divisions, some real but stationed elsewhere, others completely fictional. The imaginary units included the 17th US Infantry Division, the 11th US Armored Division, and the 35th US Airborne Division. Each fictional division had its own detailed history, insignia, and chain of command. Physical infrastructure supported the illusion. In southeast England, concentrated in Kent, Essex, and East Anglia, the Allies constructed what appeared to be massive invasion preparations. At Dover, 255 dummy landing craft, designated Big Bobs and Wet Bobs, floated in the harbour. These sophisticated constructs, built from scaffolding tubes, canvas, and oil drums, required 6 to 7 3-ton trucks to transport the 500-plus parts for each unit. A 20-man crew needed 6 hours to assemble one dummy craft, which weighed 8 tons completed, light enough that they frequently capsized in strong winds, requiring constant maintenance and replacement. Unknown to German intelligence, by 1944, every single agent they believed they had operating in Britain was actually under British control. The double-cross system, administered by the 20 Committee, XX in Roman numerals, hence double cross, represented the most complete intelligence victory in espionage history. The system's crown jewel was Juan Pujol García, a Spanish citizen who had approached both British and German intelligence services in 1941, determined to work against Nazi Germany. Initially rejected by the British, Pujol convinced German Abwehr officers in Madrid that he could establish a spy network in Britain. Operating from Lisbon with a tourist guidebook, a railway timetable and imagination, Pujol created fictional agents and sent reports to Germany that were so convincing the British became alarmed at this unknown agent's activities. On April 24, 1942, MI5 finally brought Pujol to London via Gibraltar. Under the code name Garbo, the Germans knew him as Arabelle, Pujol and his handler Thomas Harris created the most elaborate double-agent operation ever attempted. From a nondescript office on Jermyn Street, they managed a completely fictional network of 27 sub-agents spread across Britain and beyond. The detail was staggering. Each sub-agent had a distinct personality, problems and motivations. Agent 3 was a Venezuelan student in Glasgow with communist sympathies. Agent 4 was a Gibraltarian waiter working in the NAAFI, Navy, Army and Air Force Institutes, who gathered intelligence from careless military conversations. Agent 7 was a Welsh ex-seaman in Swansea, who led a network of Welsh nationalists. When Agent 3 was killed during the North African campaign, Pujol needed to eliminate him as his reports from Scotland were becoming difficult to maintain. Garbo reported his death to the Germans and even placed an obituary in British newspapers. The Germans' trust in Garbo reached extraordinary levels. In July 1941, they sent him £20,000, equivalent to £1.25 million in 2023, through the Japanese embassy to fund his network. They provided him with secret ink, questionnaires about specific intelligence requirements, and eventually awarded him the Iron Cross First Class on July 29, 1944, one of the only civilians to receive this honour. The Allies developed visual deception to an art form that extended far beyond inflatable equipment. Operation Quicksilver 1 through 6 created an entire fictional military infrastructure across southeastern England. Q lighting sites simulated the illumination patterns of major military installations. At night, dimmed lights suggested blacked-out bases with imperfect light discipline. Vehicle headlights moved along predetermined routes, creating the impression of nighttime military traffic. The 406th Combat Engineers, attached to various deception operations, mastered the creation of physical evidence that would convince German reconnaissance. Using bulldozers with special track attachments, they created the distinctive marks of different vehicle types. A Sherman tank left tracks 18.75 inches wide with distinctive rubber block patterns. They could reproduce these exactly. They learned that tanks turning created characteristic pivot marks in soil, that heavy vehicles compressed earth differently when fully loaded versus empty, that military vehicles leaked specific fluids creating particular stain patterns. Dummy fuel installations appeared along the Dover coast, constructed from camouflaged sewage pipes and boards. From aerial reconnaissance altitude, these installations appeared identical to genuine fuel depots, complete with security fencing, guard posts, and vehicle tracks suggesting regular supply deliveries. The Allies even simulated accidents, a crashed truck here, a collapsed camouflage net there, adding authenticity through imperfection. The Dover Castle tunnels, carved into the white cliffs, housed the nerve centre for radio deception. Banks of transmitters operated 24 hours daily, maintaining the electronic signature of FUSAG. Operators worked in shifts, maintaining consistent patterns that German direction-finding stations could track. They positioned transmitters at locations corresponding to fictional unit headquarters, ensuring that German radio intelligence would place invented divisions exactly where visual reconnaissance confirmed them. The German intelligence apparatus, despite its reputation for efficiency, suffered from fundamental structural flaws that made it vulnerable to Allied deception. The Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, employed 21,000 officials by 1941, yet internal rivalries with the Sicherheitsdienst, SD, the SS intelligence service, created dysfunction that the Allies exploited. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr until February 1944, was himself of questionable loyalty to the Nazi regime. His organization had been penetrated not just by Allied agents, but by internal resistance members. Colonel Hans Oster, Canaris's deputy, actively worked against Nazi interests. When Canaris was arrested following the July 20, 1944, assassination attempt on Hitler, the Abwehr was absorbed into the Reich Security Main Office under Walter Schellenberg, creating further chaos in German intelligence gathering. At Fremde Heere West, Foreign Armies West, the Wehrmacht department responsible for evaluating Allied strength, Colonel Alexis von Roener commanded a small staff tasked with an impossible mission. Roener, a devout Christian and member of the Confessing Church, opposed the Nazi regime while serving in one of its most sensitive positions. His intelligence estimates consistently inflated Allied strength, not from incompetence but as deliberate sabotage. When Roen received reports about FUSAG from multiple sources, Garbo's network, aerial reconnaissance, radio intercepts, he validated and amplified them. His May 1944 estimate placed 89 Allied divisions in Britain when only 45 actually existed. He reported the US 8th Army Corps as combat-ready in Folkestone, when it wouldn't be operational until June 15th. These inflated reports, stamped with Fremde Heere West's authority, went directly to Hitler and the German High Command. German signals intelligence, despite sophisticated equipment and well-trained operators, fell victim to their own assumptions. They intercepted genuine communications from real units that the Allies intentionally associated with FUSAG. The British 3rd Infantry Division, for instance, was real and stationed in Scotland, but German intelligence placed it under FUSAG command based on fabricated radio traffic. This mixing of real and fictional elements made the deception nearly impossible to unravel. Beyond Garbo, the double-cross system operated a symphony of double agents, each contributing to the grand deception. Duško Popov, codenamed Tricycle, was a Serbian playboy who convinced the Germans he moved in high society circles, where military secrets flowed freely with champagne. His reports to the Abwehr, actually written by M. Wind-5, included a complex mix of true but harmless information, outdated intelligence, and crucial lies about Allied intentions. Roman Czerniawski, a Polish Air Force officer codenamed Brutus, had operated a resistance network in France before his capture. Turned by the Germans, or so they believed, he was escaped to Britain where he radioed intelligence to Paris. His military background gave his reports special credibility when describing FUSAG preparations. On May 31, 1944, just days before D-Day, Brutus reported that FUSAG remained in southeast England, awaiting orders for the main invasion. Wolf Schmidt, codenamed Tate, held the distinction of being the longest-running double-cross agent. Parachuted into England in September 1940, he was captured within hours and turned. For nearly 5 years, until May 2, 1945, Tate transmitted intelligence to Hamburg. The Germans trusted him so completely they never suspected that his reports about V1 and V2 impact sites, deliberately misplaced, caused them to adjust their targeting away from central London. The coordination required was staggering. Each agent's reports had to align without being suspiciously identical. They needed to reflect their supposed access levels. Garbo's network might report troop movements, while Brutus could describe command decisions. Timing was critical. Agents had to report discoveries in logical sequences that matched German expectations about intelligence gathering. As June 1944 approached, the deception operation reached crescendo. Every element had to work in perfect harmony to maintain German belief in the Pas-de-Calais invasion, until Allied forces were firmly established in Normandy. The stakes couldn't be higher. If German panzer reserves moved to Normandy in the first 48 hours, the invasion might fail. On May 29, 1944, Garbo began transmitting a series of urgent messages. His Agent 4 in Southampton reported massive troop concentrations. Agent 7 in Swansea described supply convoys heading south. The messages, sent to German intelligence in Madrid, created a picture of imminent action, but carefully avoided specifics that might prompt immediate German response. The Ghost Army units, now in England, executed their most critical performances. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops created notional marshalling areas in East Anglia. Inflatable equipment appeared in fields, carefully positioned under camouflage netting that didn't quite conceal them. Radio operators maintained round-the-clock transmissions, simulating pre-invasion communications surges. Sound trucks played recordings of tank engines warming up in the pre-dawn hours. Physical preparations intensified the illusion. Allied aircraft dropped aluminum foil, window or chaff in patterns that simulated bomber formations heading for Pas-de-Calais. Motor torpedo boats towed radar reflectors that created the electronic signature of invasion fleets. Operation Taxable and Operation Glimmer, executed on the night of June 5th to 6th, created two fictional naval forces approaching Cap d'Antifer and Pas-de-Calais. German reconnaissance, severely limited by Allied air superiority, managed only fleeting glimpses of these preparations. Luftwaffe pilots, flying at 33,000 feet to avoid anti-aircraft fire, photographed what appeared to be massive troop concentrations in southeast England. Photo interpreters at Luftwaffe headquarters counted hundreds of tanks, thousands of vehicles, and extensive landing craft assemblies, nearly all fake. At 01:35 hours on June 6, 1944, as Allied paratroopers descended on Normandy, German intelligence still believed the main invasion force remained in southeast England. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, received the first reports of Allied landings with scepticism. This had to be the diversion Führer Hauptquartier had predicted. The real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais. The German response reflected this conviction. The 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend and Panzer-Lehr Division, 500 tanks and 40,000 men, received orders to move toward Normandy, then had those orders countermanded based on fears about Pas-de-Calais. Hitler, who personally controlled panzer reserves, refused to release them, convinced that Normandy was a feint. At 0300 hours on June 6th, Garbo began transmitting his most crucial message. Having discovered the Normandy landings from his agents, he reported them to Madrid, accurate information, but timed to arrive after the landings were underway, too late for German response, but perfect for establishing credibility. Then came the masterpiece. Garbo reported that his Agent 3 had identified FUSAG forces preparing to embark, that Normandy was indeed a diversion, that the real invasion would target Pas-de-Calais once German reserves committed to Normandy. German intelligence treated Garbo's message as confirmation of their existing beliefs. The 15th Army's war diary recorded, "It is clear that the enemy is trying to draw our reserves to Normandy to facilitate their main assault elsewhere." General Hans von Salmuth, commanding 15th Army, kept his 18 divisions, approximately 200,000 combat troops, locked in position around Pas-de-Calais. The deception held with remarkable tenacity. On June 9th, 3 days after D-Day, German intelligence still assessed Normandy as a diversion. Ultra-intercepts revealed Hitler stating on June 11th that he expected the main invasion imminently. Not until late July, 7 weeks after D-Day, did German command finally accept that Normandy was the only invasion, and by then Allied forces had broken out of the beachhead. Following D-Day, the Ghost Army crossed the Channel to continue their deception operations in continental Europe. Their mission evolved from strategic deception to tactical battlefield trickery, but the principles remained identical: make the enemy see what wasn't there and miss what was. Operation Elephant, conducted from July 1st to 4th, 1944, near Normandy, saw the Ghost Army simulate the 2nd Armoured Division's presence, while the real unit moved into position for Operation Cobra. Using just 600 men, they created the impression of 15,000 troops and hundreds of vehicles. German artillery, deceived by the fabricated positions, wasted thousands of shells on inflatable equipment and empty foxholes. The sophistication of battlefield deception grew with experience. During Operation Brittany in August 1944, the Ghost Army simulated Task Force A, suggesting an attack on Brest from the wrong direction. They broadcast radio traffic in clear language accidentally, revealing false attack times. Sound trucks played recordings of bridge construction at fake crossing points. German defenders, reacting to these illusions, weakened their actual defensive positions. Operation Brest, from August 20th to 27th, 1944, demonstrated the unit's evolution. Task Force Mason, portrayed by Ghost Army units, created such a convincing presence that German intelligence reported an entire armoured division where only a few dozen specialists operated. German prisoners later reported that their commanders had positioned reserves based on these fabricated threats. The Ghost Army's techniques constantly evolved. They learned that German observers expected certain patterns. Tanks that never moved were suspicious, so they repositioned inflatables nightly. They created heat signatures under fake vehicles using oil drums filled with burning materials, fooling German infrared detection. They even simulated the gradual accumulation of supplies before fake attacks, understanding that sudden appearance of material looked suspicious. The magnitude of German intelligence failure becomes clear only when examining specific unit deployments. The German 15th Army, the most powerful German force in France with 18 divisions, remained at Pas-de-Calais through the critical weeks after D-Day. These units included elite formations: the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, and the 116th Panzer Division Windhund. Each division represented approximately 15,000 men with hundreds of tanks, artillery pieces, and support vehicles. Had even half of 15th Army moved to Normandy in the first week after D-Day, the Allied beachhead might have been crushed. Instead, these forces sat idle, watching for an invasion that existed only in German intelligence files. The resource allocation revealed German priorities. At Pas-de-Calais, the Wehrmacht concentrated substantial defensive forces, including 2,000 artillery pieces, extensive minefields with 6 million mines, 100,000 beach obstacles, and 500 concrete bunkers and gun positions. Meanwhile, Normandy's defences, while substantial, were significantly weaker. The German 7th Army defending the actual invasion beaches comprised only 8 divisions, roughly 120,000 men, with limited armour support. The disparity in force concentration directly resulted from German belief in FUSAG's threat. German naval and air forces similarly misallocated resources. The Kriegsmarine positioned its few remaining surface vessels and U-boats to intercept invasion fleets heading for Pas-de-Calais. The Luftwaffe, already severely weakened, concentrated its fighter coverage over the wrong coastal sectors. Reconnaissance flights that might have discovered the deception were instead directed to monitor fabricated army positions. Beyond statistics and deployments, the deception's human dimension emerges through individual accounts. General Lieutenant Hans Speidel, Rommel's chief of staff, later testified about the psychological pressure of defending against enemies that seemed everywhere and nowhere. Staff officers worked 18-hour days analysing intelligence about Allied forces that didn't exist, developing counter-strategies for invasions that would never come. Major Hans von Luck, commanding a panzer battalion in 21st Panzer Division, described the frustration of receiving contradictory orders as German command tried responding to both real and imaginary threats. His unit received 4 different movement orders on D-Day alone, consuming precious fuel and time moving between positions based on false intelligence about Allied intentions. German soldiers manning the Atlantic Wall experienced psychological warfare's full weight. Private Klaus Fischer, stationed near Calais, wrote to his family about seeing ghost ships on the horizon that disappeared when observed closely, actually Allied deception operations using radar reflectors. The constant false alarms, the anticipation of invasions that never came, eroded morale and readiness. The impact extended to German civilians. French resistance members reported that German forces requisitioned supplies and fortified positions based on fabricated threats, creating hardship for local populations. In one instance, near Dover, German long-range artillery expended precious ammunition bombarding dummy installations, while real Allied preparations proceeded unmolested elsewhere. The first cracks in German understanding appeared through prisoner interrogations. Captain Wilhelm Detmer, captured in Normandy on June 18, 1944, expressed confusion about why Fusag hadn't attacked. Under questioning, he revealed German intelligence believed at least 25 divisions remained in southeast England. His interrogators, maintaining operational security, neither confirmed nor denied his beliefs. As Allied forces advanced through France, captured German intelligence documents revealed the depth of deception. Maps found at 15th Army headquarters showed detailed positions of FUSAG units, everyone fictional. Intelligence summaries described notional division movements with precision that would have been admirable if the units had existed. The psychological impact on German officers who discovered the deception was devastating. Colonel Otto Hoffmann, a senior intelligence officer captured in August 1944, initially refused to believe that Fusag was fictional. When shown evidence, including aerial photographs of inflatable equipment, he reportedly said, "Then we are not just defeated, we are fools." The full scope became clear only during post-war interrogations. At Mondorf-les-Bains, Luxembourg, where senior German officers were held, American intelligence officers conducted systematic debriefings. General Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of the Armed Forces High Command, admitted on July 23, 1945, that German intelligence had completely failed to detect the deception. "We believed what we wanted to believe," he stated, "and the enemy showed us exactly what we expected to see." The Ghost Army's roster reads like a preview of post-war American cultural achievement. Bill Blass, who had painted inflatable equipment, became one of fashion's most influential designers, revolutionizing American couture. His ability to create illusion with fabric perhaps originated in creating military deceptions with canvas and rubber. Ellsworth Kelly, who served as a camouflage artist, pioneered hard-edge painting and minimalism. His famous works, characterized by bold geometric shapes and pure colors, reflected techniques developed hiding military equipment. "The camouflage work was about making something visible disappear," he later said. "My art became about making nothing visible appear as something." Art Kane, later famous for photographing jazz musicians for Esquire's A Great Day in Harlem, served in the 603rd Engineers. His understanding of visual composition, of how eye movements could be directed and misdirected, originated in creating military installations that existed only as illusions. Arthur Singer Jr., who painted camouflage, later created the celebrated Birds of North America stamp series, his attention to detail honed by making rubber equipment look real. These artists brought unique skills to warfare. They understood that deception wasn't about perfect replication, but about meeting expectations. A tank didn't need to be perfect. It needed to look like what a German photo interpreter expected to see from 30,000 feet. This principle, that perception matters more than reality, would influence their post-war careers. The logistics of sustaining Operation Fortitude through summer 1944 required unprecedented coordination. Every element, visual, sonic, and electronic, had to remain synchronized across thousands of square miles and dozens of fictional units. The London Controlling Section maintained master plots tracking every notional division's supposed location, strength and activity level. Consider the complexity. FUSAG comprised 11 fictional or misplaced divisions. Each division theoretically contained 15,000 men, 2,000 vehicles, and hundreds of support elements. Ghost Army units had to maintain signatures for all these constructs. Radio traffic suggesting supply requests, medical evacuations, disciplinary actions, and routine administration. They created patterns of life that German intelligence could monitor and believe. Weather created constant challenges. Rain turned inflatable equipment into collapse hazards. Water accumulated in folds, adding weight until structures failed. Wind exceeding 30 miles per hour could destroy entire simulated motor pools. Ghost Army units developed rapid response teams that could repair or replace damaged equipment before dawn reconnaissance flights. They installed drainage systems in inflatable structures, guy wire systems for stability, and weighted bases preventing equipment from becoming airborne. The coordination between double agents reached extraordinary precision as D-Day approached and passed. Each agent's reports had to maintain internal consistency while contributing to the overall deception. MI5's B1A section, managing the double-cross system, maintained detailed files tracking every piece of information each agent had transmitted. Juan Pujol Garcia's network alone required extraordinary management. His 27 fictional sub-agents generated hundreds of reports monthly. Each sub-agent had distinct handwriting. Pujol and Harris developed different styles, linguistic quirks, and information access. The financial dimension added complexity. MI5 had to manage German payments, maintaining accounts that showed appropriate expenditures for a spy network that existed only on paper. Crisis management tested the system. When one of Garbo's notional sub-agents was arrested, MI5 staged an elaborate deception. They placed notices in Welsh newspapers about a Spanish national's arrest, created police records, and had Garbo report the agent's loss to German handlers. The Germans not only believed the story, but commended Garbo for maintaining network security despite the setback. The psychological effect of believing in fabricated forces created decision paralysis in German command structures. Every military decision required considering multiple threat vectors, many imaginary. Field Marshal von Rundstedt's headquarters maintained situation maps showing Allied forces that outnumbered actual strength by 100%. The command structure itself amplified confusion. Hitler retained personal control over strategic reserves, particularly panzer divisions. Requests for redeployment travelled from field commanders through Army Group headquarters to OKW, Armed Forces High Command, then to Hitler personally. At each level, staff officers evaluated threats based on intelligence about forces that didn't exist, adding delays and confusion. General Friedrich Dollmann, commanding 7th Army in Normandy, exemplified the pressure. Responsible for defending the actual invasion beaches while German intelligence insisted the main threat lay elsewhere, Dollmann faced impossible choices. His requests for reinforcement were denied based on FUSAG's imaginary threat. On June 28, 1944, Dollmann died, officially from a heart attack, though many historians suspect suicide driven by the impossible situation. Even as Germany crumbled, deception operations continued. Operation Fortitude, conducted March 18 to 24, 1945, saw the Ghost Army's most ambitious tactical deception. With just 600 men, they simulated the 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions, 40,000 troops, at the Rhine River crossing near Düsseldorf. The operation's sophistication reflected lessons learned through nearly a year of deception warfare in Europe. Sound trucks played recordings of bridge construction while real crossing preparations occurred miles away. Inflatable vehicles appeared in staging areas, deliberately poorly camouflaged to ensure German observation. Radio traffic simulated the administrative chaos of two divisions preparing for opposed river crossing. The deception held despite the desperate German situation. Wehrmacht units, even in March 1945, repositioned based on Ghost Army threats. German artillery, critically short of ammunition, wasted precious shells on inflatable targets. The actual Rhine crossing, occurring where German forces were weakest due to redeployment against illusions, succeeded with minimal casualties. For decades after the war, the full scope of Allied deception remained hidden behind classification walls. Ghost Army veterans were sworn to secrecy, forbidden from discussing their service even with families. The classifications served multiple purposes. Cold War tensions made revealing deception capabilities problematic, and intelligence services worried that exposing the operation's full scope might compromise ongoing operations. Gradual declassification began in the 1970s. J.C. Masterman's The Double Cross System, published in 1972, revealed the operation's basic outlines despite British government opposition. F.W. Winterbotham's The Ultra Secret in 1974 exposed the code-breaking dimension. But full declassification of Ghost Army operations didn't occur until 1996, over 50 years after the war's end. The delay had consequences. Many Ghost Army veterans died without recognition. Historical accounts of D-Day and subsequent operations, written without knowledge of the deception, presented incomplete pictures. German memoirs and histories, written by officers unaware they'd been deceived, perpetuated misconceptions about Allied strength and capabilities. As classification walls fell, extraordinary documentation emerged. The Ghost Army's official history, written immediately post-war but classified for decades, revealed operational details that seemed fantastic even to military historians. Photographs showed inflatable equipment so realistic that even in close-up images, distinguishing them from real vehicles proved difficult. German documents captured in 1945 but not fully analysed until decades later confirmed the deception's success. Intelligence files from Fremde Heer West showed detailed organisational charts for FUSAG units that never existed. The National Archives ultimately released thousands of documents related to Operation Bodyguard and its subsidiary operations, revealing not just the deception's scope, but its precision. Personal papers donated by veterans added human dimensions to the official records. Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Simonson's private photographs showed Ghost Army soldiers posing with their inflatable creations, the images stamped secret and hidden for 50 years. Diary entries from signal company operators described the pressure of maintaining radio deceptions, knowing that single mistakes might expose entire operations. The psychological impact of discovering they'd been completely deceived influenced post-war German military thinking profoundly. When the Bundeswehr was established in 1955, its training doctrine emphasized intelligence verification and source multiplication, direct responses to the World War II intelligence catastrophe. German military historians, given access to Allied deception documentation, underwent painful reassessments of the war. Battles previously attributed to German tactical failures were revealed as deception successes. Commanders dismissed as incompetent were rehabilitated. They had made logical decisions based on false intelligence. General Heinz Guderian, in his memoirs revised after learning about Allied deception, wrote, "We were not defeated simply by material superiority. We were defeated by fighting enemies who existed only in our minds, while the real enemies struck where we were weakest. This is a humiliation greater than simple military defeat." The German General Staff's traditional pride in professional excellence was shattered by realizing their complete intelligence failure. Post-war German military education emphasized skepticism about intelligence, verification of sources, and recognition that enemies might manipulate perceptions. Beyond strategic impact, the Ghost Army's legacy lived through its veterans' post-war achievements. These men rarely discussed their wartime service until declassification. Then, in their 70s and 80s, they began sharing stories that seemed too fantastic for fiction. Reunions in the 1990s brought together aging artists who had shared history's most creative military secret. The 2013 documentary The Ghost Army brought public recognition finally. Veterans in their 90s received standing ovations at screenings, their contribution finally acknowledged. On March 21, 2024, Congress awarded the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal. 3 veterans survived to attend: 100-year-old Bernard Bluestein, 99-year-old John Chrisman, and 99-year-old Seymour Nussenbaum, representing the 1,100 men who had performed miracles with rubber and sound. Following the ceremony, one of the veterans passed away, leaving only 2 known survivors by late 2024. Operation Fortitude and the Ghost Army operations fundamentally changed intelligence warfare. The principle that controlling enemy perceptions could achieve strategic objectives without conventional combat became central to Cold War strategy and continues influencing modern military doctrine. The operation demonstrated that in modern warfare, information superiority might matter more than conventional military superiority. The Allies didn't need more tanks than Germany. They needed Germany to believe Allied tanks existed where they didn't. Intelligence services worldwide studied the operation, extracting lessons about deception, counterintelligence, and perception management. The operation also revealed intelligence services' vulnerability to confirmation bias. German intelligence saw what they expected to see, interpreted evidence to support existing beliefs, and dismissed contradictory information. These psychological vulnerabilities remain relevant to modern intelligence challenges. The statistics of Operation Fortitude represent the most successful force multiplication in military history. The Ghost Army's 1,105 men effectively neutralized enormous German forces at Pas-de-Calais. Adding other deception operations, fewer than 3,000 Allied personnel misdirected 400,000 to 500,000 German forces throughout the campaign. This extraordinary ratio exceeded any conventional military operations achievements. The economic efficiency was equally staggering. The entire deception operation cost less than a squadron of heavy bombers, but achieved strategic effects exceeding massive bombing campaigns. Every dollar spent on inflatable equipment and double-agent operations returned hundreds in German resources wasted defending against illusions. Time factors multiplied the advantage. German forces remained at Pas-de-Calais for 7 weeks after D-Day, 49 days when these elite units might have contained or crushed the Normandy beachhead. Each day of delay allowed Allied forces to land additional divisions, accumulate supplies, and prepare breakout operations. Technologies developed for military deception found unexpected civilian applications. Inflatable structures refined for military purposes influenced emergency shelter design and temporary architecture. The acoustic projection techniques advanced outdoor sound systems, with modern concert sound engineering building on foundations laid by Bell Labs' work with the Ghost Army. Radio deception techniques contributed to early electronic warfare and computer science. The patterns used generating false radio traffic influenced early random number generation algorithms. Materials science advanced through developing weather-resistant inflatable equipment, influencing everything from aircraft emergency slides to rescue rafts. The Ghost Army proved that artists could be warriors, that creativity could be weaponized, that imagination might matter more than firepower. The veterans returning to civilian careers brought unique perspectives about perception and reality. Their influence extended beyond individual achievements. The concept that artists could contribute to national security led to increased government support for arts education. The post-war explosion of American cultural influence included many veterans who had learned art could change the world. They understood that perception shapes reality, a lesson learned creating military illusions that would influence American art, design, and culture for generations. In an era of information warfare, deepfakes, and social media manipulation, Operation Fortitude's lessons resonate powerfully. Military academies worldwide study the operation as a masterclass in strategic deception. Modern military doctrine incorporates deception as a fundamental principle rather than auxiliary tactic. The ethical dimensions provoke ongoing debate. Operation Fortitude succeeded through comprehensive lying, to enemies certainly, but also involving complex moral calculations. Modern military ethicists grapple with when such comprehensive deception becomes justified. As the last Ghost Army veterans pass away, their legacy demands final accounting. These men, average age 21 in 1944, accomplished something military theorists considered impossible, winning battles without fighting them, defeating enemies through imagination rather than destruction. Their victory was bloodless but decisive. German forces waited for invasions that never came because young American artists made them believe they would. The Ghost Army proved that creativity, imagination, and artistic vision could be as powerful as any conventional weapon. The German commanders who spent summer 1944 defending against fabricated armies were not fools. They were professional military officers, trained at world-renowned academies, experienced in combat, supported by sophisticated intelligence services. Yet they were completely deceived by rubber tanks, recorded sounds, and fictional radio transmissions. Today, as digital phantoms replace inflatable tanks, as social media campaigns substitute for double agents, as cyber operations create virtual deceptions exceeding anything the Ghost Army achieved, Operation Fortitude's lessons remain urgently relevant. The technology has changed, but the principle endures. In warfare, what the enemy believes shapes outcomes more than objective reality. The young artists who inflated rubber tanks in 1944 demonstrated that future wars might be won not on battlefields but in minds, not through destruction but through deception, not by generals but by artists. The Germans never knew the Allies used a phantom army of inflatable tanks until after their defeat was complete. By then, the damage was done. Not just military defeat, but the psychological devastation of discovering they had been fighting illusions. The Ghost Army had won its strangest victory, defeating an enemy by making them defeat themselves, conquering through creativity, winning a war with imagination. Their legacy reverberates still in a world where the battle for perception has become the battle for everything. The inflatable tanks have long since deflated, the recorded sounds have faded, the radio transmissions have gone silent. But the echo of their achievement remains. In information warfare, the most powerful army might be the one that exists only in the enemy's imagination. The Germans learned this lesson too late, defending against invented armies while real ones sealed their fate. The question for our age is whether we have learned it in time, that in a world of information warfare, reality itself becomes a battlefield, and the most dangerous enemies might be the ones we create in our own minds.